In the 2010s, if you wanted the definition of a terrible team with a bleak future, then the Sacramento Kings fit the bill. In about every aspect that required consistency in a basketball organization, they were inconsistent. Take this for a simple example. From 2010 through 2017, the organization went through 6 coaches. Another example is that the Kings lineup were full of barely passable NBA players, and better yet, these players rotated every couple of years. So basically, it was impossible for this team to improve, given that the team didn't even know who was going to be there from season to season. This inconsistency resulted in the consistency of losing seasons. In fact, the Kings were such losers that they never had one season where they were able to get past 33 wins in this span. And if we take a look further, the Kings had the 3rd worst record from this stretch, only behind 2 teams, the 76ers, who were purposefully tanking for picks, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. But if the Kings had one other thing that was consistent for them, it was Demarcus Cousins, with all the good and the bad. He was a player that thrived in the chaos that was the Sacramento Kings, and despite the Kings making it nigh impossible to create an environment to improve, Cousins found a way around it. But it didn't change the fact that for half of his career, he would have to deal with the incompetence that was the Sacramento Kings and their organization. But this is where we shift the focus onto Boogie. Sure, the Kings were a terrible franchise at this point, but Boogie had issues of his own. Boogie was never truly in control of his emotions, and it showed at the most critical times when he was on the team. You see, Demarcus Cousins was initially viewed as a physical player. And if you take a look at the players with the most personal fouls per game since 2000, Boogie stands at the top of the list, and that's no coincidence. In that same time span, he had the 3rd most ejections behind only Draymond Green and Dwight Howard. He was also 20th all-time in technical fouls. He had 143 total technical fouls, and 107 of them he received in his first 7 years in the league. So it's an understatement to say that he was a troublesome player. Not only that, but he got in his way just as much as the Kings did. But he continued to improve year after year despite obstacles that were placed in his way, whether he placed them himself or the team did. You see, the 2010s were probably the weakest decade for centers, and Cousins was a standout among few. Sure, he was a physical player like the other centers such as Dwight Howard or for a short stretch Andrew Bynum, but there was a lot more to his game. He was a center that if teams weren't able to do so, he could bring the ball up the court himself and make a play. It usually led to a ferocious dunk, of course, but he wasn't just limited to that. He could shoot the ball to a level where the defense had to respect him, and he could also play make when needed. But when you're on a terrible franchise, you can only stay for so long before things have to change, whether it's the decision based off a player or the team. We're going to skip the first 6 years of Cousins' career, as while he improved, there was no notable changes from the team. So going into year 7 of Cousins' career, the Kings started their season going 16-22. For a regular team, that would be underwhelming, but for the Kings, this was amazing, as this was a better win percentage than any of their previous seasons with Cousins so far. And also, despite being under 500, they were in possession of the 8th seed. But despite that, on January 10th, there were rumors of Cousins potentially being traded. When this was brought to the attention of the Kings GM Vlade Divac, he noted that they didn't want to trade Demarcus and they hoped to have him for a long time. This sentiment was matched by Demarcus Cousins, as when he was asked a couple days beforehand whether or not he wanted to stay in Sacramento or not, he mentioned that he'd love to see his jerseys up in the rafters when he retired. His only concerns, though, were winning and pushing his team to the next level. And after 6 years of failing to do so, it looked like Demarcus Cousins was finally ready to lead a team into the postseason. But there were hints of the Kings thinking otherwise. Here's where we bring in Shaq. Shaq was a minority owner of the team, so he had insights on the Kings' decisions, and he had this to say about Boogie. He hasn't shown great leadership qualities yet. One of the best centers in the league, this cat can do it all, but he's a hothead. If they want to make a run, he's gonna have to be a leader. So in the 19 games leading into the All-Star break, it would be up to Cousins to prove to the Kings that he would be able to be the leader the team needs and guide the teams to win, as he said himself. Unfortunately, this led to the Kings going 8-11 in that stretch. which we have to put in perspective of the Kings. This was still the same win percentage as their overall record, but you can't expect to be a playoff team living under 500. After gauging that the Kings were going nowhere and nowhere fast, the Kings deemed Cousins unable to lead the team and found a deal to ship Boogie off to the New Orleans Pelicans. This came as a surprise to many, as the Pelicans weren't even one of the teams listed for the big trade. However, in this trade, the Kings received Tyreke Evans, a player they previously drafted before trading away, Buddy Hield, a rookie at this point, Langston Galloway, and first and second round draft picks. When looking at the trade, it seems the Kings could have gotten more, but for the Kings, this was 100% a trade to change the culture of the team, as it had almost nothing to do with winning. Despite having a superstar talent, the team felt like they were enabling a player with no playoff success to show for it, and an attitude to back up absolutely nothing. For Cousins, he felt that he was being betrayed by the Kings, and not just the Kings, specifically Vlade Divac. And he made sure to go into detail, as when he was asked about how he felt about the Kings going against their decision, he emphasized that the trade was a coward move. When asked if he would want a response from Divac, he basically just said fuck now. And after this, he went on a tirade. To summarize this, he thought it was a coward move from a coward person, so he would only get a coward response. He said this is what he's seen time and time again, and he's seen it from all the same types. But he makes sure to go into more details. He was there when they fired Mike Malone in 2014, so he knows how they operate. He thought that it was sick that he would invite Vlade to his home, sit in his theaters, and just talk about the team, talk about what moves he wanted to make, what players he would want to add, all of that. He just didn't understand. And to just receive a text in the All-Star game, just knowing that the owner let him go without letting him know, he was in complete shock. He just didn't understand what was going on. In the end, he calmed down and he just said he wanted Divac to handle things like a man, like a professional. At the end of it all, Boogie wanted his first 7 years with the Kings to mean something and just not be a waste. But at the end of his first chapter in his career, there were just a lot of lows, but not many highs. Despite the sour taste the trade left on Boogie, he entered a situation where he could be an important piece to a potential championship team. You see, Boogie'd enter a position where he'd be paired with not only a star, but the other best big man in the league in Anthony Davis. And this was the season after the Warriors added Kevin Durant and won the rematch against the Cavaliers in the finals. You see, this Warrior team was great, but one of their weaknesses is that they had a weak front court, and Boogie and AD would be a perfect pairing to exploit that. They were seen as the next Twin Towers in the NBA, and all that was left for the Pelicans to do was to let these bigs adjust to each other. And they did so for 47 games as they went 26-21, and the Pelicans looked like they were on track to make the playoffs. Boogie averaged 25.5 points, 13 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and 1.6 steals and blocks, while AD averaged 26.5 points, 10.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1 steal, and 2 blocks. The Pelicans also had a solid backcourt with Drew Holiday and Rajon Rondo, but sadly this is where things take a turn for the worse for Demarcus Cousins. You see, during a game against the Houston Rockets, Demarcus Cousins suffered a full rupture of his Achilles that would take him out for the rest of the season. It seemed like this was a season where Cousins could finally make an impact, and it was stripped all away from him in one moment. Remember, at this point, Cousins still hasn't played one game in the playoffs, and he was primed to be on a potential team to beat the Warriors, and now he has nothing. While Cousins was sidelined for the rest of the season, the Pelicans adjusted by adding Nikola Mirotic, a power forward who would be a good sharpshooter and complement to Davis in the backcourt. Cousins would watch from the bench and look disappointedly as his team would actually do better without him. They went 22-13 for the rest of their season. This would slate the Pelicans as a 6th seed who would go on to play against the 3rd seeded Portland Trailblazers. But besides being a 3rd and 6th seed matchup, this series looked to be competitive. The Pelicans ended their season with a record of 48-34, and the Portland Trailblazers ended their season with 49-33. That's only a 1-game difference. In the standings, there was a three-way tie for the 4th, 5th, and 6th seed. The Pelicans were just the losers of the tiebreaker, and the Trailblazers were one loss away in being in a four-way tie. To add to this series, these teams were being led by the two best players in their respective drafts, Damian Lillard and Anthony Davis. This series would ultimately determine who was the better pick. However, when the series was actually played out, it was more of a wash than expected. In Game 1, it was a close game, but due to the defensive efforts of Jrue Holiday, Damian Lillard basically had no offensive impact, and the Pelicans won 97-95. In Game 2, Jrue Holiday again put up a great performance, but this time it was on the offensive side, as he put up 33 points and a Pelicans win. In Game 3, the Pelicans' trade acquisition in myriad stepped up and scored 30 on 4-6 shooting from 3, and the Pelicans won again. And in Game 4, the Pelicans made sure to put the Trailblazers away, as Anthony Davis sealed off the series with a 47-point performance backed up by a 41-point performance from Jrue Holiday. Afterwards, the Pelicans would match up against the Golden State Warriors. This was the matchup that the Pelicans were waiting for, but that's when they had Boogie playing for them. He's on the bench now. And the star power of the Golden State Warriors were just too much for the Pelicans as they lost the series 4-1. This was probably a series that Demarcus Cousins could have had a great impact on, but unfortunately for the team and for him, he just wasn't able to play. This just culminates to another disappointing season for Demarcus Cousins. Sure, he was having a career year with Anthony Davis, but it doesn't matter if you get injured and still fail to play your first playoff game. After the Warriors beat the Pelicans, they went on to win another championship, and the Warriors pulled what seemed to be another free agency robbery. They signed Demarcus Cousins to a one-year, $5 million deal. Boogie's team was defeated by the Warriors in the playoffs, and he eventually signed with them. It feels like deja vu with the KD trade all over again. This was also a surprise as Demarcus Cousins was expected to sign a 5-year, $150 million deal with the Pelicans. This would be another opportunity for him to recover and participate for another impactful playoff team, this time a proven championship level team. However, when Boogie was asked about his decision to join the already super team, he basically said he didn't care what other people thought. He knew how it would be perceived by many fans and players, but he just didn't care. This was basically his last resort, as he would be able to win while still recovering from an Achilles injury. And it was a smart move by him, as while he'd be recovering from an Achilles injury, he would be able to prove his value on a championship level team, probably incentivizing himself with the rest of the league. And he made sure to ramp himself up for the second half of the season, as he was able to play 30 games. He wasn't as good as pre-injury, but he was for sure a good piece to add to a great team. But fate seemed to have beef with Boogie, as his career again took a turn for the worse. He was finally able to play his first playoff game and it went successfully, but in his second playoff game against the Clippers, he was reaching for a steal and while diving for a loose ball, injured his quadricep. This was probably due to overcompensating for his Achilles injury. This would eventually take him out of the playoffs until the final series against the Raptors. And at this point, the Warriors were too injury-ridden to have a chance at winning. Even when Demarcus Cousins makes the safe play, things never turn out well for him. And from here, his NBA career quickly went downhill, as he would sign to the Lakers, but again had an Achilles injury that took him out for the whole season. Boogie's career was just never the same. He was basically an NBA journeyman as he went on 4 teams in 2 years, and could never get back to the level that he once was. Boogie had all the potential in the world, but in the first half of his career he had a terrible franchise backing him up, and he didn't make it any better by getting in his own way. When his tumultuous first half of his career came to an end, the second half of his career was filled with strife and misfortune. And even when he tried to play it safe, things just never went his way. While it's not spoken on too much, Boogie Cousins' career is one of the greatest what-if stories that we've seen in the NBA. And it's just completely unfortunate that we never got to see the full potential of Demarcus Cousins.